Song of Death by C.A. Varian, Chapter 1. Help! Azor Galanede screamed as the current pulled her little sister under the tumultuous waves. Someone, please, save her! She had only taken her eyes off the 7-year-old for a moment, but that was enough for Dame Laia to drift out of her reach. No one was on the beach. They were on their own. Running into the rough waters, Azor tried to grasp her sister's hand, but the child only thrashed before going under the surface once more, pulled further into the current. Sobs poured freely out of Azor, salty tears mixing with the brine of the Lamalas Sea. Someone, please! Dame Laia did not surface again. Panicked, Azor jumped forward and sucked in a deep breath as she dove under. She searched for a sign of the child, but opening her eyes was useless. The dark waters burned, obscuring her vision. She couldn't see anything. She flailed her limbs violently, feeling around for her sister in the rough seas, but her hands found nothing. Her lungs protested, forcing her up for air, but a wave crashed over her and almost forced her under once more. She choked and sputtered as the water assaulted her nose and mouth before she could inhale. Tiny arms drifted toward her with the next crest. Reaching out, she grabbed her sister as she fought the push and pull of the current in a desperate attempt to reach the beach. Storm clouds hovered ominously above, completely blocking out the sun as she laid her sister's limp body on the sandy shore. The eerie darkness that swallowed up the calm afternoon gave the deserted coast a sinister feeling. Dame Laia! Azor sobbed as she shook her sister's body. The adolescent had turned a sickening shade of blue, but she couldn't give up. Please, someone, help us! She pushed on the child's chest, frantically desperate to expel the water from her little lungs. But it was useless. There was no sign of the color receding, no sign of breath. A flash of lightning cracked across the darkening sky as Azor wept over her sister's tiny frame. Dame Laia was gone. She'd lost her, and it was all her fault. The 7-year-old was her responsibility, and she failed to keep her safe. At 18 years old, Azor knew better than to take her eyes off the child for even a moment. With that one mistake, she had killed the last of her family, the only person she had left in this life. She'd already lost her parents, and now Dame Laia too. There was no one left, and no more reason for her to carry on. Looking over her shoulder at the violent waves that took her sister from her, Azor considered meeting the same end. All she had to do was walk in and let go. There was no point in persevering anymore. The air thickened around her, feeling heavy against her skin, and she looked down at Dame Laia's lifeless body once more. Once the waves took her, the pain of being the only survivor would disappear. Everything would disappear. The agony that small mistake caused, the feeling of her heart wrenching in two, would end. The humidity continued to condense until water droplets formed and hung around her, suspended in midair. An icy hand touched her shoulder, jolting her to the side. Azor whipped her head around, but no one was there. Although it was midday, the sky had darkened so much that it looked like night. She shook off her grim thoughts and bent to lift her sister's body, intending to remove her from the beach and bring her somewhere safe. But the invisible hand touched her shoulder again. Freezing in place, Azor sucked in a deep breath before looking up. Her eyes darted to the side, spotting a hooded figure beside her, its face hidden in shadows. Although she couldn't explain it, power seemed to radiate out from them, encircling her and holding her in place. She couldn't make out the face of the being as it loomed over her like a silent sentinel, an overseeing God with no empathy for its people, watching but not helping. Help her, please. Azor wept over her sister, defeated and shivering, as her voice came out as a whispered plea. She knew Dame Laia was beyond saving, but she still begged for a miracle. The cloaked individual lowered themselves over the young girl's body, placing a pale hand on the child's still chest. It did not rise and fall. There were no signs of life. She was gone. Azor's breath caught in her throat as she continued to plead. Can you help her? Please, I'll do anything. Silence filled the shoreline in the place of her sister's beating heart. It was enough to make Azor wonder if the being was a figment of her imagination. Would you trade yourself? The hooded figure didn't look at Azor as it spoke, but the voice was feminine. Azor swallowed back the bitter dread the words invoked within her. She understood the question, but still hoped she had misunderstood, almost afraid to answer. Trade myself? How? Her soul for yours. The voice was icy and devoid of emotion, sending shivers across Azor's body, chilling her blood. Yes. Azor's response was only a whisper, but there was no question. Yes, she would trade her life for her sister's. Dame Laia was too young to die. Freezing fingers grasped Azor's hand without warning. The figure's grip was crushing as its jagged nails tore into her flesh. Stop! You're hurting me, she whimpered as she struggled to pull her hand away, but it was no use. The hold only tightened further. There was no response as she watched droplets of her crimson blood soak into the golden sand. When the hooded woman let go and returned her hand to Dame Laia's chest, Azor cradled her bleeding appendage. She was unsure of what to say or do as she watched her sister's body, silently praying for life to return to her bluish complexion, while the mysterious woman muttered unintelligible words to herself. Time stood still. The only sounds were Azor's thundering heart and the shallow whispers of her breath. She squeezed her eyes closed and forced herself to take a deep breath, exhaling slowly to steady herself as she silently begged the universe to bring her sister back. After a few painfully uneventful moments, a forceful gasp escaped Dame Laia's mouth, followed by a frantic attempt to suck in air. The world spun around Azor at the miraculous sight, making it difficult to breathe. Return to these waters before the sun descends. If you do not, you will not live to see the morning. The words were cold, distant. Azor turned to face the dark figure with skeptical questions on her tongue, but before she could speak, the figure disappeared. She wanted to ask who the woman was, wanted to thank her, but there was no trace of her ever having been there, except for the fact that Dame Laia was alive. The sun peeked from behind the clouds, warming her skin with its brilliant rays as her sister's eyes opened. Sissy? Dame Laia's tiny voice was strained and unsure. Crushing the girl against her chest, Azor clung to her little sister as though she were afraid the child would disappear, just as her savior had. Tears of joy mingled with the salty water that soaked the little girl's dress. Lifting the shivering child in her arms, Azor headed back toward their home just as the birds began to sing. It's okay. Everything will be okay. The end of chapter 1. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, you were listening to Song of Death by C.A. Varian. The audiobook will come out soon, but you can get the print version right now. And I can tell you that the rest of the story has a lot to do with mermaids.